The mist was a living, breathing entity in Baksun, clinging to the ancient peaks and winding through the narrow valley like a phantom river. It was an immutable feature of this remote northern village, a silent shroud that muffled sounds and softened the edges of reality. Lan, a young woman of 24, had chosen this isolated pocket precisely for its untouched quality, its promise of old ways and forgotten lore. As an ethnographer, her notebooks were her closest companions, filled with the scratch of graphite capturing the essence of fading traditions. She had arrived 3 days prior, her small rental car battling the treacherous, often invisible mountain roads that snaked around precipitous drops, each turn bringing her deeper into a timeless world. The village itself was a tapestry woven from weathered wood and sun-baked earth, its inhabitants moving with a quiet grace that spoke of generations spent in harmony with the challenging landscape. Their faces, etched with the stories of hard living and enduring spirit, were a treasure trove for Lan's research. She meticulously documented their indigo dyeing techniques, their intricate weaving patterns, the haunting melodies of their folk songs that carried on the wind. Yet, among the tangible threads of culture, an invisible current ran beneath the surface, a whisper of something more ancient, more unsettling. It was during an interview with a gnarled old woman, whose hands were as calloused as the bark of an ancient tree, that Lan first heard the murmurings. The woman spoke of the house without a shadow, a place at the very edge of the village, shrouded not just by the pervasive mist, but by a denser, more permanent veil of dread. It stood sentinel at the confluence of the last dirt path and the looming, impenetrable forest. A 2-story structure of dark, termite-eaten wood, its upper windows always inexplicably ajar, like watchful, unblinking eyes. For nearly 30 years, it had remained unoccupied, a silent testament to a forgotten tragedy. The old woman's voice, raspy like dry leaves, dipped to a hush as she recounted the chilling whispers that had permeated the village for decades. "They say, little one, that anyone who steps inside that house, they lose their shadow." Lan, ever the scientist, arched a skeptical brow, though a prickle of fascination traced its way down her spine. The woman continued, her eyes fixed on some distant, unseen point. "Under the sun, under the moon, under the lamplight, no shadow falls. It's like the light passes right through them, leaving no trace of their being." Lan scribbled furiously in her notebook, her pencil scratching a counterpoint to the old woman's hushed tones, cataloging it under local superstitions. Later that afternoon, seeking further context, Lan found herself at the humble home of the village elder, Ong Meng, a man whose wisdom was as vast as the mountains surrounding them. His face was a road map of wrinkles, each crease a testament to years of watching seasons turn and lives unfold. He offered her a bitter herbal tea, his gaze steady and deep. When Lan broached the subject of the abandoned house, a subtle shift occurred in his demeanor. A cloud seemed to pass over his eyes, and his hand, which had been resting calmly on his knee, tightened imperceptibly. "Ah, the house," Ong Mint rumbled, his voice a low, thrumming sound like distant thunder. He sighed, a weary exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of untold stories. "That house, it remembers things the living have forgotten." He took a slow sip of his tea, allowing the silence to stretch, amplifying the gravity of his words. Lan waited patiently, her ethnographer's instinct telling her this was a moment of profound cultural disclosure, a window into beliefs that defied logic but held immense power here. Finally, Ong Mint set down his cup with a soft clink. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into hers, intense and solemn. "Those who walk without a shadow, Lan," he warned, his voice now a mere whisper, yet filled with an undeniable force. "They are not truly here. They lose their soul. The shadow, young one, is not just a trick of the light. It is part of us. It is what keeps us whole. It is what binds us to this world." His words hum in the air, heavy and thick with an ancient certainty that Lan, with her modern, rational mind, struggled to reconcile. Lan, despite the tremor of unease his warning elicited, found herself more intrigued than scared. Her academic training had taught her to dissect, to rationalize, to seek scientific explanations for phenomena often attributed to the supernatural. This was a cultural narrative, a fascinating local myth ripe for investigation. Her skepticism was a shield, but beneath it, a powerful current of curiosity pulled her. The elder's words, rather than deterring her, had ignited a spark of determination. She would not believe in ghosts or lost souls, but she would certainly explore the mystery. The house, for her, became a puzzle, an enigma begging to be solved. That evening, the mist outside her small guesthouse window thickened, wrapping the entire village in a damp, silent embrace. Lan lay on her narrow bed, her mind buzzing with the day's discoveries, her notebooks spread open on the small table beside her, their pages filled with observations and questions. The lamp cast a warm, comforting glow, but even its light seemed to struggle against the pervasive gloom that pressed in from beyond the glass. The air grew cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant pine. Just as she was drifting into a light slumber, a sound broke the oppressive silence. It was faint at first, a rhythmic cadence, undeniable and distinct. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps. They seemed to emanate from the muddy path directly outside her room, pacing just beyond the flimsy wooden wall. Lan's eyes snapped open. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thump against her ribs. She held her breath, straining to hear, convinced it was a late villager returning home. The steps continued, moving from right to left, then back again, a measured, unseen patrol. There was an unnerving regularity to them. Lan carefully slid off her bed, her bare feet silent on the cold floorboards. She crept to the window, pulling back the thin curtain just a fraction. Outside, the night was a canvas of impenetrable white, the mist so dense it swallowed all light, all form. She peered harder, trying to discern a silhouette, a movement, anything. But there was nothing. The empty path lay shrouded in an ethereal glow, utterly devoid of any living presence. The courtyard was bare, the few trees mere phantoms in the swirling fog. Yet the footsteps continued, clear as day, right outside, just beyond the glass. They were too close, too distinct to be dismissed as imagination. Lan's breath hitched in her throat. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, forcing herself to be rational. The wind? A trick of sound? But the steps were too rhythmic, too human. A chill, unlike anything the cold night air could produce, crept over her. The footsteps faded as abruptly as they had begun, leaving behind only the profound, unsettling silence. Lan stood there for a long time, clutching the curtain, her scientific skepticism now fractured by a sliver of genuine, primal fear. The first rays of dawn, struggling against the tenacious mist, found Lan awake and deeply unsettled. Her sleep had been a fragmented affair, punctuated by the phantom rhythm of footsteps that, even in retrospect, felt unnervingly real. The rational part of her mind, the trained academic, fought fiercely to dismiss it as a product of an overactive imagination, a trick of the ancient house's acoustics, or perhaps just the wind playing a cruel joke. Yet the cold dread that had gripped her, the tangible sense of a presence just beyond the visible, refused to be entirely reasoned away. It was a crack in the sturdy wall of her skepticism, and through it something ancient and unsettling had seeped in. She dressed quickly, her movements sharp and deliberate, as if to shake off the lingering unease. Her breakfast, a simple bowl of rice porridge, tasted bland, her thoughts preoccupied. The words of Om Manya echoed in her ears. Those who walk without a shadow, they lose their soul. The warnings, once dismissed as mere folklore, now held a sharper, more insistent edge. This wasn't just a research subject anymore. It was a burgeoning mystery that demanded immediate personal investigation. She had to see the house, to understand the source of the whispers, to find the logical explanation that surely lay buried beneath layers of superstition. By early afternoon, the mist had begun to recede from the lower parts of the village, though the mountain peaks remained veiled in an ethereal haze. A weak, watery sunlight filtered through the thinning clouds, promising a brief respite from the perpetual damp. Lan packed her small backpack with her camera, an extra notebook, and a flashlight, a practical preparation for what she still believed would be an academic exploration. She set out towards the edge of the village, her steps firm, her resolve hardened by a blend of fear and fierce intellectual curiosity. The path to the abandoned house narrowed and grew rougher, eventually turning into a barely discernible track swallowed by encroaching weeds. A profound silence enveloped her as she left the last cluster of homes behind. Even the chirping of insects seemed to falter here, replaced by the rustle of leaves in a non-existent breeze. The house stood stark against the muted backdrop of the forest, its 2 stories a dark, brooding silhouette. It was larger than she had imagined up close, its timber facade warped and stained by decades of neglect, the tiles on its roof broken and moss-covered. The upper windows, always open a sliver, seemed to watch her approach like unblinking, vacant eyes, mirroring the pervasive sense of being observed that settled upon her. A shiver, unrelated to the crisp air, traced its way down her spine. There was an undeniable wrongness to the place, a palpable heaviness in the air that pressed down on her despite the weak sunlight. It was the smell that hit her first as she drew closer, a potent mix of damp earth, decaying wood, and something indefinable, something ancient and stagnant. The front door, thick and made of dark, heavy wood, stood ajar, groaning faintly on rusted hinges. It beckoned her in, an open maw inviting her into its cool, shadowed interior. Lan hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the rough wood. The warnings, the footsteps, the strange silence, they all coalesced into a potent argument for turning back. But the ethnographer in her, the seeker of truth, pushed forward. With a deep breath, she pushed the door wider and stepped across the threshold, her boots soft on the accumulation of dust and debris that coated the floor. The interior of the house was a realm of perpetual twilight, even with the afternoon light filtering in through the gaps in the roof and the grime-coated windows. The air was cold, with a pervasive dampness that seemed to seep into her bones, carrying that same peculiar, musty scent. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light, performing a slow, silent ballet. Her footsteps, despite her conscious effort to be quiet, echoed strangely, the sound reverberating through the empty rooms with an unsettling amplification, as if the very walls were listening, responding. She moved deeper into what appeared to be the main living area, her senses on high alert. To her left, a window, less grimy than the others, allowed a generous stream of sunlight to cut diagonally across the room, illuminating a section of the far wall. In that brilliant rectangle of light, the forgotten furniture, a sturdy, dust-laden wooden table, a couple of rickety chairs, cast distinct, elongated shadows. The outline of a forgotten vase, long since shattered, was still visible in the dark imprint on the wall. Everything, every inanimate object touched by the sun, asserted its presence through its darkened double. Lan walked towards the light, her gaze fixed on the wall, her mind still searching for logical explanations. She stepped directly into the illuminated patch, her intention to observe how her own shadow would interact with the existing ones. She raised her hand, ready to see the familiar dark shape mirror her movement on the plaster. But as her eyes scanned the wall, a sudden, horrifying realization froze her breath in her lungs. There was no shadow. Her hand, raised against the bright rectangle of sun, cast no dark twin. Her body, standing squarely in the direct path of the light, was a lone, solid form. No outline stretched behind her, no dark silhouette clung to her feet. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. A cold, nauseating wave of terror washed over her, chilling her to the marrow. Disbelief warred with the stark, irrefutable visual evidence. It couldn't be. This was impossible. She tried again, frantically. She jumped, her boots thudding softly on the floor. No shadow. She spun around, hoping a different angle would yield a different result. Still nothing. She waved her arms, a frantic, desperate pantomime, her heart now hammering against her ribs with a frantic, desperate rhythm. The light, sharp and clear, illuminated the wall, the dust, the furniture, but it passed through her as if she were made of glass, leaving no trace, no dark echo of her existence. Her scientific mind reeled, utterly unprepared for this complete subversion of physics. Her throat was dry, her tongue thick. Just as a desperate, choked cry threatened to escape her lips, a whisper, cold and intimate, slithered into her ear, so close she felt a puff of icy breath on her nape. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, resonant with an ancient, knowing quality, a voice that seemed to rise from the very fabric of the old house. Bóng của cô đang ở nơi khác. Your shadow is elsewhere. The words were spoken in Vietnamese, a language she understood perfectly, but their meaning transcended mere translation, plunging her into an abyss of primal fear. The whisper, a phantom caress of sound, seemed to reverberate not just in her ears, but deep within her very bones. Your shadow is elsewhere. The words, spoken in her native tongue, stripped away the last vestiges of Lan's rational defenses. This was no trick of the light, no cultural superstition to be dissected in a scholarly paper. This was real and terrifying. A primal instinct screamed at her to flee, to burst out of the house and never look back, to erase the image of her shadowless self from her memory. But another, stronger compulsion, rooted in her unwavering academic drive, held her rooted to the spot. It was the thrill of the unknown, the allure of a mystery so profound it defied all logic, that tethered her. She had come to Bakson seeking the unusual, the hidden truths, and now, confronted with something utterly inexplicable, she couldn't simply turn away. The very impossibility of her situation fueled a desperate need for understanding. Who or what had spoken, and where, indeed, was her shadow? Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a source, a hidden speaker, anything that could explain the disembodied voice. The empty, dust-filled room offered no answers, only deeper shadows and the oppressive silence that followed the whisper. The sunlight, once a comforting presence, now felt harsh and accusatory, an unyielding witness to her bizarre predicament. The cold, damp air seemed to press in on her, and the scent of decay grew sharper, tinged now with something metallic, like old blood. Lan forced herself to breathe, shallow, ragged gasps that did little to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She took a hesitant step back, then another, moving out of the direct sunlight, as if by removing herself from its revealing glare, she could somehow regain what she had lost. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now laced with a burning determination. She wouldn't leave, not yet, not without answers. She began a methodical search of the room, her movements slow and deliberate, each step echoing unnervingly. Her eyes scanned every surface, every dusty corner, every cobweb-laden crevice. The furniture, draped in decades of grime, offered no clues. The walls, once adorned with portraits or tapestries, now bore only the faded outlines of where such items once hung, like ghosts of domesticity. The silence was punctuated only by the soft creak of the aging house and the frantic thumping of her own pulse. It was in a far corner, obscured by a fallen beam and a thick curtain of dust, that she noticed something unusual. A small, dark shape, half buried beneath plaster debris. Driven by an urgent sense of purpose, Lan knelt, pushing aside the crumbling wood and dust with trembling hands. What she uncovered was a small, intricately carved wooden chest, dark with age and moisture. It was locked, but the wood was so decayed that a gentle pull on the lid snapped the brittle clasp. Inside, nestled among dried leaves and what looked like ancient brittle herbs, lay a collection of papers. They were old, yellowed, and fragile, their edges crumbling to the touch. With utmost care, Lan lifted the topmost sheet. It was a page from a journal, its script a delicate, flowing hand, written in what appeared to be classical Vietnamese, a style she recognized from her studies. The ink was faded, but still legible. As she began to read, a new kind of chill, intellectual and profound, replaced the primal fear. This was no ordinary journal. It was a fragmented, desperate testament from the house's former occupant, a man identified only as Taido, the scholar. He had been a traditional healer, a practitioner of ancient medicine, but not in the way she understood it. He spoke of illnesses of the spirit, of the subtle energies that bound a person to their physical form. The initial entries spoke of his theories, radical and disturbing. He believed that the bong, the shadow, was more than just an optical phenomenon. It was, he wrote, the very essence of a person's life force, their sole anchor, inextricably linked to their vitality. He theorized that by detaching the shadow, one could theoretically detach oneself from the decay and limitations of the physical body, effectively prolonging life, perhaps even achieving a form of immortality. He called this process Wat Van Hon, the art of soul separation. Lan's fingers trembled as she turned the fragile pages. The scholar's handwriting grew more erratic, his tone increasingly obsessive. He detailed his early theoretical experiments, his conviction that the shadow was not something that followed a person, but something that held them. Bóng không phải là thứ đi theo ta, she read, her eyes widening in horror. Đó là thứ giữ ta lại. The shadow is not something that follows us, it is something that holds us back. This line, written in bold, frantic strokes, was a chilling reversal of common understanding. Then came the entries that made her blood run cold. He had moved beyond theory, he had begun to experiment. My beloved wife, Hong, has been plagued by a consumption that wastes her away. I believe I have found the key to her salvation. By separating her bong from her ailing form, her spirit can endure, unburdened by this failing vessel. Lan gasped, a horrified realization dawning on her. He wasn't curing her body, he was attempting to save her spirit by unmooring it. The journal continued with increasingly disturbing accounts. He documented the process with a chilling detachment, describing his attempts to coax, to pull, to sever the shadows from their human hosts. He wrote of their initial confusion, then their gradual detachment, their waning vitality, their bodies becoming hollow shells. His own family, it became horrifyingly clear, had been his subjects. My children, so pure, so full of life, will live forever beyond the frailties of flesh. Their bongs will be their essence. The last few pages were torn, stained, and barely legible, but what remained was enough to paint a gruesome picture. A final entry, scrawled in a frantic hand, detailed a night of terrible storms, a deluge that had raged for hours. The wind howls, the rain beats like a drum of sorrow. The bongs are restless tonight, they stir, they seek. The sentence ended abruptly, cut off by a violent tear in the page. The final, incomplete entry before the journal disintegrated into dust was a chilling fragment. All of them, gone, after a night of heavy rain. All of them, but their shadows. Lan dropped the pages, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The truth, or at least one horrifying version of it, was beginning to coalesce. This house was not merely abandoned, it was a tomb of experiments, a prison of severed souls. The people who had entered and lost their shadows hadn't merely experienced an optical illusion, they had encountered the lingering remnants of the scholar's dark work. And now, she too was without her shadow. The implication was clear, stark, and utterly terrifying. Her shadow was not elsewhere as a figure of speech. It was literally somewhere, separated from her, perhaps trapped, just like the others. The cold that had permeated the house seemed to deepen, seeping from the pages, from the very walls, now chilling her soul. A profound silence descended upon Lan, heavier and more suffocating than before. The journal, a testament to a monstrous ambition, lay scattered at her feet, its fragile pages whispering tales of a madman's twisted quest for immortality. Her own shadowless state was no longer an isolated, inexplicable phenomenon, but a chilling continuation of the scholar's dark legacy. She was not merely a curious ethnographer anymore. She was a participant, an unwilling subject in a drama that had unfolded decades ago. The rational part of her mind, though severely shaken, still struggled for dominance. Could a shadow truly be detached? Could a soul anchor be ripped from a person? Every scientific principle screamed against it, yet the evidence of her own non-existent shadow, coupled with the chilling confessions in the journal, argued otherwise. The house, once an object of academic interest, was now a predatory entity, its very walls imbued with the horror of past deeds. Lan slowly rose, her limbs stiff and heavy, her gaze sweeping across the room with a newfound terror. Every creak, every shift in the old house's timbers now sounded like a breath, a sigh, a watchful presence. The air grew colder, and that peculiar, metallic scent intensified, mingling with the musty odor of decay. She felt an unbearable lightness, a disturbing sense of incompleteness, as if a vital part of her had indeed been severed. Ong Mang's warning, "Those who walk without a shadow, they lose their soul," resonated with a terrible clarity. Her eyes fell on the sunlit patch on the wall, the spot where she had first discovered her shadow's absence. She approached it again, cautiously, driven by a desperate, morbid need to confirm. She raised her hand, her palm flat against the sunlight, then slowly, deliberately, turned it. Still nothing. The light flowed around her, through her, leaving no trace. It was as if she were a ghost, though a very tangible one, trapped in a house full of unseen specters. The whisper, "Your shadow is elsewhere," echoed in her mind, taking on a new, sinister meaning. If the scholar's writings were true, then her shadow wasn't merely gone, it was held, somewhere in this house. This realization ignited a spark of desperate hope, a flickering ember in the icy grip of fear. If it was held, perhaps it could be retrieved. The thought was a lifeline, pulling her from the abyss of despair. She began to search with a renewed, frantic energy. The main living room, the kitchen, the small, derelict bedrooms on the ground floor. She scoured them all, overturning rusted pots, pushing aside collapsed furniture, her hands getting caked with dust and grime. She looked for anything, any hidden compartment, any secret niche where something vital might be concealed. But the ground floor yielded nothing but emptiness, decay, and the ever-present chill. The staircase to the second floor loomed before her, dark and foreboding, its wooden steps groaning ominously under her tentative weight. Each creak was a jolt, each shadow a potential threat. The air on the upper floor felt even colder, denser, as if the very atmosphere itself resisted her intrusion. This level, too, seemed to hold nothing but dust and silent decay. A large communal room, perhaps a study or a family hall, dominated the space. Its high ceiling draped in cobwebs that swayed like macabre banners in the imperceptible drafts. Her gaze landed on a large, intricately carved wooden screen, leaning precariously against the far wall. It was too ornate, too well preserved compared to the surrounding wreckage to be simply forgotten. A strange, almost magnetic pull drew her towards it. Her fingers, still trembling, traced the delicate, swirling patterns of the wood. It felt unnaturally cold, radiating a subtle, almost imperceptible chill that was distinct from the general dampness of the house. Behind the screen, the wall was made of rougher, unpainted planks, a stark contrast to the plastered walls of the main rooms. And in the center of these rough planks, almost perfectly concealed by the screen, was a faint outline, barely visible beneath a layer of grime. It was the shape of a door, smaller than a typical entrance, almost a utility hatch. Her heart pounded with a renewed intensity. This had to be it. She pushed against the hidden door, but it resisted, unyielding. It wasn't locked. It seemed to be stuck, perhaps swollen by years of damp, or maybe just sealed shut by a buildup of dust and rust. Lan braced herself, placing both hands against the rough wood, and pushed harder, grunting with effort. The wood groaned in protest, a long, drawn-out shriek that echoed through the empty house. With a final, desperate heave, the door lurched inward, scraping against the floorboards with a sound like a tortured animal. Beyond it lay not another room, but a narrow, dark opening leading down. A flight of rough-hewn stone steps descended into what could only be a cellar or a hidden basement. A breath of air wafted up from the darkness, colder and heavier than anything she had yet encountered in the house, carrying that same peculiar, metallic scent, now powerfully potent. It smelled of earth, of cold stone, and of something else, something that prickled the back of her throat and tightened her chest. Fear, raw and unadulterated, surged through her. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to abandon this insane quest and run. But the scholar's words, "Bong hu phải là thứ đi theo ta, đó là thứ giữ ta lại," now held her captive more surely than any lock and key. Her shadow was down there, she was certain of it, and without her, she was incomplete, vulnerable, perhaps even slowly dying, just like the scholar's family. She pulled out her flashlight, its beam a weak, hesitant probe against the oppressive gloom. The light struggled against the profound darkness of the stairwell, revealing only the nearest few steps before being swallowed whole. Each step downward was a descent into an unknown abyss, a journey deeper into the heart of the house's chilling secret. The metallic scent grew stronger, almost tasting of iron on her tongue. Her breath hitched. She had to go down. She had to find her shadow. The thought was both a terrifying obligation and an intoxicating promise. The house had claimed something from her, and she would not leave until she reclaimed it. The descent into the cellar was a journey into a deeper, colder kind of silence. The rough stone steps, slick with generations of damp, felt treacherous beneath Lan's boots. Each step downward echoed not only in the confined space, but also in the hollow chamber of her chest. Her flashlight beam, a trembling circle of defiance against the pervasive gloom, revealed walls of raw, unworked stone, sweating with moisture, their surfaces glistening under the weak light. The air grew thick, heavy with the metallic tang that now pressed against her sinuses, making her throat ache. It was the smell of old earth, ancient stone, and something undeniably organic, something that spoke of hidden depths and forgotten secrets. At the bottom of the stairs, the beam of her flashlight cut across a small, circular chamber, barely large enough for her to stand upright. The ceiling was low, pressing down, and the air was utterly stagnant, as if no fresh breeze had touched this space for centuries. The overwhelming feeling was one of profound imprisonment, a timeless void where light and life struggled to exist. Her light danced over the walls, revealing a horrifying tableau. The walls were not bare stone. They were covered from floor to ceiling with what looked like faded, sepia-toned photographs, but they were not photographs in the traditional sense. They were something far more disturbing, far more primal. They were shadows, hundreds of them. Pressed flat against the cold, damp stone as if plastered there by an unseen, immense force. Human figures got in various poses. A child reaching from a toy, a woman with a basket on her head, a man standing proudly, a family group huddled together. Each one was a dark, two-dimensional imprint, a perfect silhouette, yet utterly devoid of detail, of life. They were not painted nor carved. They were, impossibly, actual shadows, hardened and fixed to the stone, like specimens in a grotesque entomological collection. They seemed to shimmer faintly under her flashlight, a trick of the light on the damp surfaces, or perhaps a residual energy clinging to these spectral imprints. A wave of nausea swept over Lan. This was the scholar's chilling legacy, preserved in this subterranean crypt. This was where the art of soul separation had truly come to fruition. Her gaze swept frantically across the silent, shadowed faces, searching. Her breath hitched. In a far corner, barely illuminated by the edges of her beam, she saw it. A familiar silhouette, smaller than many of the others, leaning against the wall, its form distinct from the family groups and individual figures around it. It was a woman's shadow, frozen in a pose of desperate, strained movement, one arm reaching out as if trying to grasp something just out of reach. It was unmistakably hers. The outline was precise, down to the subtle curve of her neck, the length of her hair. It was her shadow, or rather the impression of it, stuck to the wall like a discarded skin. And it was trembling. Faintly, imperceptibly at first, then with a visible shudder, as if struggling against an invisible bond. A low, keening sound escaped Lan's throat. Her shadow, her very essence, was trapped here, yearning to be free, yearning to reunite with her. The knowledge was both a confirmation of her worst fears and a powerful surge of adrenaline. As she stared, transfixed, a new detail emerged from the surrounding darkness. Scrawled across the cold stone in a hand that seemed to resonate with the same frantic energy as the last entries in the scholar's journal were words etched in charcoal. The characters were large, almost crude, as if written in haste or by someone under duress. Lan brought her flashlight closer, her hand shaking so violently the beam danced like a frantic firefly. Ai lấy được bóng của người khác sẽ sống thay họ. The words chilled her to the bone, colder than the damp stone, more horrifying than the imprisoned shadows. Whoever takes another shadow shall live in their stead. It was a proclamation, a dark decree, revealing the true, ultimate ambition of the scholar. It wasn't just about prolonging life, it was about usurpation, about stealing another's existence, another's soul, to sustain one's own. The whisper in the main room, "Your shadow is elsewhere," now took on an even more sinister layer of meaning. It wasn't just a statement of fact, it was a prelude, a warning. A terrible realization dawned on her. If the scholar had succeeded in detaching shadows, and if his family had indeed vanished after a night of heavy rain, what had become of their physical bodies? And what of their shadows? Were they truly imprisoned, or were they waiting? And who or what had spoken to her in the living room? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her. This house wasn't just a container for shadows, it was a hunter, lying in wait. Lan suddenly felt utterly exposed, vulnerable. She was down here, in the heart of this horror, without her own shadow to anchor her, to protect her. The heavy, damp air felt like a shroud, and the surrounding shadows on the walls seemed to ripple with a malevolent, silent energy. She instinctively reached out towards her trembling shadow on the wall, a desperate, irrational impulse to touch, to retrieve. But just as her fingertips brushed against the cold stone, a sound, distinct and utterly terrifying, emanated from above. A low, guttural moan, like something ancient and long dormant stirring awake. It was followed by a soft, rhythmic thudding, a heavy, dragging sound that seemed to be coming from the main floor above, right where she had found the journal. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It was too slow, too deliberate to be human, too heavy to be natural. The sound grew louder, closer, echoing eerily in the oppressive silence of the cellar. It was moving, slowly but steadily, towards the hidden door at the top of the stairs. Whatever was making that sound was heading directly for her. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of fear and intellectual fascination. She wasn't just exploring anymore, she was prey. Her flashlight beam wavered, the trembling of her hand reflecting the escalating terror within her. She was trapped in a small, enclosed space, surrounded by silent, imprisoned shadows, with something ancient and malevolent ascending towards her. The metallic smell was now overwhelming, almost suffocating. The air itself seemed to crackle with an unnatural energy. She looked desperately around the small cellar, her mind racing, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. But there was nowhere to go. Only the stone walls, covered in their horrifying tableau, and the narrow stairwell leading back to whatever awaited her above. The rhythmic thump and drag grew louder, now accompanied by a faint, high-pitched scratching, like nails on wood. It was coming for her, and she had no shadow to protect her. The rhythmic thump, drag, grew louder, each sound reverberating through the stone walls of the cellar, a grotesque heartbeat drawing steadily closer. It was a sound that spoke of immense weight, of something being pulled, something unnatural. The scratching noise intensified, a dry, grating whisper that prickled the hairs on Lan's arms. Whatever was on the main floor, it was now at the top of the secret stairs, clawing at the wooden door she had just forced open.
Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. Her flashlight beam, now a frantic strobe in her shaking hand, bounced off the shadowy figures plastered to the walls, momentarily distorting their already chilling forms into grotesque visages of despair. Her own shadow, still trembling faintly in the corner, seemed to cry out to her, a silent, desperate plea. She was trapped, a single, vulnerable light against an encroaching, ancient darkness. The heavy wooden door above creaked open with a low, drawn-out groan, similar to the sound it had made when she pushed it inward, but this time it was being pulled from the outside. A sliver of deeper darkness, a profound blackness that absorbed even the faint light from the main house, appeared in the opening. No light filtered in from above, only an absence, a suffocating void. The metallic scent in the cellar intensified, now thick and almost cloying, making her gag. Then, from the darkness above, something began to descend. It was slow, agonizingly so, each step heralded by a soft, squelching sound, wet and sickening. The rhythmic thump, drag now accompanied this descent, punctuated by the soft scrape of something long and hard against the stone. Lan pressed herself against the cold, damp wall of the cellar, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, her breath catching in ragged gasps. Her flashlight beam, fixed on the top of the stairs, trembled uncontrollably. A form began to materialize on the blackness, slowly, horrifyingly. It was impossibly tall, its head scraping against the low ceiling of the stairwell opening. Its limbs were elongated, grotesquely thin, and ended in what looked like oversized, claw-like hands and feet. The overall impression was of a figure stretched beyond its natural limits, a macabre caricature of a human form. It was not a physical being in the way she understood it. It was a figure woven from shadows, yet possessed of a terrifying solidity. It was impossibly dark, darker than any shadow, a complete absence of light that seemed to drain the very illumination from her flashlight beam as it approached. Its eyes, if it had any, were unseen, but Lan felt an intense, malevolent gaze fixed upon her. A low, vibrating hum, almost below the threshold of hearing, emanated from it, a sound that resonated deep within her chest, threatening to shadow her composure. As the creature reached the last step, its form became clearer, more horrifyingly. It stood towering in the small cellar, its head nearly touching the ceiling. Its impossibly long, thin neck bent at an unnatural angle. This was no human. This was something born of the scholar's forbidden art, a perversion of life and shadow. Its presence was crushing, suffocating, a silent scream of pure malevolence. Then, the creature turned its head slowly, its elongated neck stretching further, its form subtly shifting, almost shimmering in the dim light. And Lan saw it.
Its shadow, if it could be called that, began to spread from its feet, flowing across the damp stone floor of the cellar. It was not a simple outline, it was a living, growing entity of pure darkness, unfurling from the creature's base like ink blooming in water. It moved with a strange, unnatural sentience, seeking. And then, to her absolute horror, the creature's shadow began to crawl towards her. It advanced slowly but inexorably across the floor, a spreading pool of blackness, colder and more profound than any natural shadow. It was immense, far too tall and too broad for her own small frame, with a horrifyingly elongated neck that seemed to writhe, independent of the creature itself. Every time Lan let out a desperate, shuddering breath, the shadow remained perfectly still, utterly unresponsive to her life signs, to her movements. It was not her shadow, it was an alien entity, a separate being seeking to claim her. It was clear what it wanted. The creature, a manifestation of corrupted shadows, was not merely hunting her. It was seeking to merge. The words of the charcoal inscription screamed in her mind. Whoever takes another's shadow shall live in their stead. This was the true horror, the ultimate trap. This creature, a living shadow, intended to consume her, to take her place, to live through her body, perhaps to finally complete the scholar's work. The shadow, a viscous, creeping expanse of pure darkness, was now alarmingly close to her feet. It oozed across the stone, a hungry, silent predator. Lan tried to move, to back away further, but her legs were rooted to the spot, paralyzed by an ancient, primal terror. Her shadow, still trembling on the wall, seemed to recoil further, desperately attempting to escape, but it was bound, unable to help her. The air in the cellar grew impossibly heavy, crushing. Lan felt her consciousness begin to waver at the edges, the cold, the fear, the crushing presence of the creature combining to overwhelm her. The metallic scent was now so strong it tasted like blood in her mouth. She could feel the icy cold of the approaching shadow on her bare ankles, a palpable, suffocating chill that promised utter annihilation. It was trying to fuse with her, to envelop her, to erase her. Her existence was flickering, like a flame about to be snuffed out. This was not just about losing her shadow, it was about losing herself entirely. The icy tendrils of the encroaching shadow licked at Lan's ankles, a cold so profound it felt like a burning. It was not merely a chill, it was a drain, a terrifying vacuum that threatened to pull the warmth and life from her very being. The creature, a towering silhouette of malevolence, remained impassive. Its long, slender head still bent at an unnatural angle, its unseen gaze fixed on the grim ballet unfolding at her feet. The profound, ancient hum it emitted resonated through the very stone, a prelude to her undoing. Panic, raw and unthinking, finally broke through the paralyzing grip of terror. This was not a moment for scientific curiosity or ethnographic study. This was about survival. A flicker of desperate hope, a survival instinct honed by generations, ignited within her. She had to move. She had to fight. With a sudden, explosive surge of adrenaline, Lan lunged forward, not towards the creature, but towards her own trapped shadow on the wall. It was an irrational act, a desperate gamble, but something deep within her screamed that her only chance lay in reclaiming what was hers. The colossal shadow on the floor surged forward to meet her, its dark mass spreading with incredible speed, aiming to envelop her before she could reach her goal. She scrambled, her boots skidding on the damp stone, the metallic scent now a nauseating choke in her throat. Her outstretched fingers, numb with cold, grazed the rough surface of the wall, inches from her trembling silhouette. The creature's shadow was now a cold, solid presence around her legs, clinging, trying to fuse. She could feel its immense, suffocating weight, the pull of it trying to drag her down, to absorb her.
Just as the creeping darkness began to ascend her body, her fingers brushed against something sharp and cold embedded in the damp mortar between the stones. It was a shard of broken ceramic, perhaps from a forgotten pot or a discarded tool long since shattered. In a flash of pure instinct, Lon snatched it, her fingers closing around the jagged edge, not caring about the pain it inflicted. She had no weapon, no defense against this spectral entity, but she had a mind, and a desperation born of terror. Her gaze darted around the small cellar, desperately searching for an answer, a weakness, anything. Her eyes caught on the faint, shimmering quality of the imprisoned shadows on the walls, including her own. They were fixed, but they were also illuminated. The thought struck her like a lightning bolt, a desperate, last-ditch idea. Light. Shadows were born of light, defined by its absence. If her shadow was trapped here, could intense light, sudden and overwhelming, disrupt the creature, or somehow free her own? It was a flimsy theory, born of panic, but it was all she had. With a guttural cry of defiance, Lon pulled out her flashlight. Its beam, previously a timid probe against the darkness, now became her only weapon. Ignoring the burning cold spreading up her legs, she aimed the light directly at her own shadow, a brilliant, focused spear of illumination against a dull, trapped form. The moment the light hit, her shadow recoiled violently, trembling harder, as if struggling against an immense, invisible force. It was a silent, desperate thrashing. The creature's shadow, which was now halfway up her torso, paused. The malevolent hum it emitted wavered, an almost imperceptible tremor in its silent song. It was a momentary distraction, a slight hesitation in its relentless advance.
That was all Lan needed. Ignoring the fear, ignoring the cold, she began to scrape the sharp ceramic shard furiously against the wall, directly around the edges of her shadow. The rough stone resisted, but the ceramic was surprisingly effective, carving faint, frantic lines around the perimeter of her trapped essence. She worked with a desperate, almost feral intensity, fueled by the encroaching darkness and the chilling hum of the creature. The creature's shadow recoiled further, a subtle but definite retreat, as if the concentrated light and the frantic scratching were an irritant. The creature itself, a towering, silent sentinel, tilted its head further, a ripple of disturbance passing through its impossibly elongated form. It was angered, confused by this sudden, unexpected resistance. As Lan scraped, a faint crack appeared on the wall, not in the stone itself, but in the fixed shadow. It was a hairline fracture, a tiny fissure in the dark, two-dimensional surface. She redoubled her efforts, carving deeper, faster, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The shadow on the wall twitched violently, its form distorted, straining. Suddenly, with a sound like tearing parchment, the shadow ripped free. It detached from the wall with a faint, almost inaudible sigh, a whisper of liberation. For a fleeting instant it hovered, a shimmering, insubstantial form in the air, directly in the path of her flashlight beam. Then, with a speed that defied logic, it surged forward, a dark, living entity, and slammed back into Lan's body. A jolt, like an electric shock, surged through her. It was not painful, but profoundly disorienting, a sudden, overwhelming reintegration. A rush of warmth, of solidity flowed back into her, filling the hollow void that had tormented her since stepping into the house. She felt whole again, grounded, anchored. The crushing lightness was gone, replaced by a profound sense of self. Simultaneously, the creature's shadow, which had enveloped her, recoiled violently, its hold abruptly broken. It hissed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone, and retracted, coalescing back around the creature's feet. The towering entity itself let out a guttural, enraged moan, a sound that vibrated with ancient fury, shaking the very foundations of the cellar. Lan didn't wait. Her shadow was back. She was whole. That was all that mattered. Without a second thought, she scrambled backward, away from the enraged creature, her eyes fixed on the narrow stairwell.
The creature, now agitated, began to move, its long, gangly limbs making the low cellar feel even more claustrophobic. It started to ascend the stairs, its intent clear. It would not let her escape. With a primal scream of terror and defiance, Lan turned and bolted, her flashlight beam a frantic dance ahead of her. She clawed her way up the damp stone steps, her feet finding purchase on the slick surface, her lungs branding with the effort.
Behind her, she could hear the heavy thump, drag of the creature's ascent growing louder, closer. It was right behind her, a towering, vengeful darkness. She had escaped its grasp, but it would not let her leave its domain. Not alive. Not with her shadow intact. The hidden door above was her only hope, a flimsy barrier against the relentless horror pursuing her. The desperate scramble up the cellar steps was a blur of primal terror and burning exertion. Lan's lungs burned, her legs ached, but the relentless thump, drag of the creature behind her fueled an impossible surge of adrenaline. Each icy breath it exhaled seemed to caress her back, a tangible presence promising cold oblivion. She could almost feel its impossibly long fingers reaching for her, a silent, predatory grasp. The metallic scent, thick and cloying, now mingled with the acrid tang of her own fear, a bitter cocktail in her mouth. She burst through the hidden door at the top of the stairs, not bothering to push it open, simply smashing through the fragile wood in her frantic haste. She stumbled into the second-floor room, gasping for air, her flashlight beam a frantic, chaotic dance as she spun around. Behind her, the creature's silhouette loomed in the narrow doorway, its head bent almost to its chest, its eyes, if it had any, burning with an unseen fury. Its monstrous shadow, freed from the confines of the cellar, now spilled into the upstairs room, a vast, undulating pool of darkness that seemed to drink the very light from the air. It was no longer confined to the floor. It began to rise, to stretch, to contort, morphing into terrifying, transient forms along the walls, mimicking the trapped shadows in the cellar, but with a terrifying, active malevolence. Lan had retrieved her own shadow, but she was far from safe. This was its domain, a house imbued with its corrupted essence. She knew, with chilling certainty, that the creature would not let her leave. It wanted her, not just her shadow, but her living, breathing form, to complete its monstrous existence. Her gaze swept wildly across the room, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything that could offer even a momentary reprieve. The large communal room was still filled with the ghosts of forgotten furniture, now mere obstacles. The windows, high and narrow, were too far, too small, and probably sealed shut by decades of neglect. She was trapped. But then her eyes caught on something else. A small, forgotten oil lamp, dark with age and dust, sat precariously on a rickety wooden shelf in a far corner. It was a faint glimmer of hope, a desperate, irrational idea, but it was all she had. The creature, a living embodiment of shadow, might be vulnerable to its antithesis. With renewed purpose, Lan lunged towards the lamp, ignoring the creature's low, guttural moan that now filled the room, ignoring the spreading darkness that threatened to engulf her. Her fingers fumbled with the cold metal, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature, perhaps sensing her intention, moved with an unexpected burst of speed, its long limbs propelling it across the floor in a silent, terrifying glide. Its massive shadow surged forward, faster now, a living wave of darkness. It reached her just as her trembling fingers managed to open the lamp's glass cover. She could feel the icy cold of its presence, the suffocating pull of its essence as it wrapped around her, threatening to subsume her once more. Her shadow, now firmly within her, felt a distinct jolt, a desperate struggle against the outside force. With a desperate, guttural cry, Lan fumbled in her pocket for her lighter, a small, mundane object that suddenly held the power of salvation. Her fingers, numb with cold and fear, struggled with the flint. Click, click, nothing. The air itself seemed to resist, conspiring with the creature.
The shadow tightened its grip, a cold, crushing embrace that threatened to squeeze the very life out of her. "No!" she screamed, a raw, primal roar of defiance. With a final desperate click, a small, sputtering flame sprang to life, a defiant spark against the overwhelming darkness. She plunged the flame into the lamp, and with a soft whoosh, the wick caught, casting a sudden, brilliant pool of light in the oppressive gloom. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The creature's shadow, which had enveloped her, shrieked. It was not a sound that originated in its throat, but rather a psychic scream of pure agony resonating directly in her mind. The dark mass recoiled violently, tearing away from her, leaving behind a searing, icy imprint on her skin. The creature itself, exposed to the sudden, intense light, seemed to writhe. Its impossibly tall form buckled, contorted, as if in immense pain. The light, though small, was focused and pure, a burning affront to its shadowed existence. Its limbs jerked spasmodically, its head snapped back, and the profound hum it emitted transformed into a high-pitched, vibrating wail that clawed at Lan's ears. The lamp, a beacon against the terror, cast sharp, dancing shadows around the room, but now a definite, solid shadow stretched behind Lan, her own. Strong, distinct, hers. It was a tangible proof of her recovered self, a shield against the creeping darkness. The creature thrashed, its form flickering, dissipating at the edges as if being eaten away by the light. It was wounded, vulnerable. This was her chance. With the lamp clutched tightly in her hand, Lan turned and ran, not towards the secret door, but towards the main entrance of the house, towards the promise of the outside world. She didn't look back. The sounds of the creature's agony, its desperate, fading wails, echoed behind her, mixing with the frantic pounding of her own feet. She navigated the dark, debris-strewn rooms of the ground floor, the small flame of the lamp dancing wildly, pushing back the oppressive shadows. The front door, still ajar, was a glimmer of salvation, a frame outlining the gray, pre-dawn light that was just beginning to break through the mist outside. With a final surge of strength, Lan burst through the threshold, gasping for breath, stumbling onto the muddy path. The air outside was cold, damp, and still thick with mist, but it was fresh, untainted by the metallic tang of death and fear. She didn't stop running until she was well away from the dark house, until the first faint hint of sunrise painted the eastern sky in soft hues of gray and rose. She leaned against a gnarled tree, her body shaking uncontrollably, the small lamp still clutched in her hand, its flame now sputtering against the encroaching dawn. She was alive. She had her shadow. But as the full light of day slowly chased away the last vestiges of night, a profound, unsettling awareness settled upon her. Her shadow stretched out before her, solid and reassuring, moving in perfect synchronicity with her trembling form. But even as she watched it, a new, chilling sensation crept over her. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, like a whisper on the wind. A feeling that another presence was close, intimately close. As she walked away from the house towards the waking village, she would often glance over her shoulder. Always, her own shadow would be there, faithful and true. But sometimes, in the periphery of her vision, or when the light hit just right, she would catch it, a faint, almost translucent secondary shadow, just a hair's breadth behind her own, mimicking her movements, a silent, spectral companion. It was too tall, too thin, its head subtly tilted, a faint, lingering echo of the creature she had escaped. The house was behind her, its secrets undisturbed, but the experience had indelibly marked her. Lan had survived the house without a shadow, but she would forever carry a chilling reminder of what she had faced. The scholar's dark art had touched her, and though she had reclaimed her own essence, a part of that ancient darkness had perhaps clung to her, a silent, unseen passenger. She was whole, but not entirely alone. From that day forward, she always felt a phantom presence, a subtle, cold brush against her back, a permanent whisper of something that walked right after her. And sometimes, in the deepest shadows, she swore she could see it, a faint, secondary reflection, a borrowed darkness, stretching impossibly tall.